Are we ready to dive into inning number 2 of game number 2? We are shipping back up to Boston. So get out your pens and notebooks, ladies and gentlemen. We are diving into the science and technology of the catching world. We are coming back at you hot and jumping right into the second inning of game number 2. I guess it's ironic to say game 2 and inning 2 while we were focusing on position number 2. Well, this episode is a special treat, and we'd be shameless to say that we've tried to get our next guest on the show since our conception. He is one of the owners to a baseball company geared towards protecting both softball and baseball catchers while providing quality products from gloves to helmets. And let's face it, folks, if you have not owned a piece of their equipment during your careers as catchers, well, you're not living the lifestyle of a catcher. All right, my intro is long-winded, so let's bring him in. Again, one of the owners of All-Star Sports. Welcome, Stan Yerga Jr. Stan, how are you doing?
Doing great, Tyler. How you guys all doing?
Fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk with us and just talk to us a little bit about All-Star Sports. Like I said in my intro there's a lot of people that all across the world have used your guys' equipment, but let's start off by, when did All-Star begin? Give us that introduction.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story. I'll keep it somewhat short, but we're basically still in our original building that goes back to the 1860s. And we're a classic New England mill building on the river. And the original company was a belt and suspender company. It also made women's corsets and men's garters to hold your socks up, which is all the rage back in the late 1800s and even into the early 1900s. And that was all going great. And the story goes that in 1960, we had a sales rep in Chicago calling on Sears Roebuck. And I'm not sure how many people listening even know who Sears is at this point, since they're somewhat defunct, but they were kind of the Target or the Walmarts of the day with their huge catalog and their department stores. And we were selling belts and suspenders to them. Those were great. And the buyer told our sales rep that they had a need for a jock strap. And so our sales rep called my grandfather one day and said, hey Dave, can you make a jock strap for Sears? And my grandfather was like, I don't see why not, sent us a sample. And basically that was the start of the All-Star division of what was the George Frost Company. So the All-Star division basically started with a jock strap, and from there it basically grew into what it is now. I mean, we first kind of went from that jock strap into football padding, hip, tail, thigh pads, elbow pads, volleyball knee pads, then got into baseball. And that's where my dad really really started focusing in on the catcher. Started having some ideas on how to make better leg guards, better chest protectors. And we had a great fortune of meeting up with this guy, Gary Roderick, who was a pro rep and still is, going into the clubhouses, talking with the players, getting product from brands onto the players and getting that feedback. And that's really where we took off, because my dad would walk into the locker room, he'd walk up to the catchers and say, hey, I'm from All-Star. I think we can make you better product. And the catchers, first of all, they're looking around, they're like, wait, you're talking to me? Because no one talks to the catchers, you probably want to go talk to the guy who hits the home runs or the pitchers, and so it really started from there. It's like, hey, tell us, how can we make this stuff better? What are the problems? And we want to come back and try to solve those problems. So, my dad would meet, with these guys, get some ideas, and then maybe, a couple months later, come back and say, hey, here's some changes. Here are the things that you mentioned. These are ways we thought that we could address it. What do you think? And we get more feedback. And it was just an iterative process, a constant evolution of listening. And we haven't changed from that because it works. I mean, it's just very authentic, very real. And fundamentally, we're just engineers. We're trying to listen to the customer, to the person who's using the product. And so whether it's spring training or as guys come through Fenway throughout the year, or we go down to the Paw Sox down in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, we're always talking with the players, getting down on our hands and knees and trying to see like, what's going on with this gear. Like the thing I tell players all the time is, tell me what you like, but also more importantly, tell me what you don't like, because that's the opportunity to make the stuff better. I always go back to something like the stress on a leg guard. They seem like such a small piece, like you barely see them from the front. But I tell guys, hey, like if the strap is bothering you and it's like cutting into your leg, I want to hear about it, because, with pop times being so, it comes down to like a minute fraction of a second. Mm-hmm. I don't want you distracted for that split second because your strap is bugging you. I want you to basically, have this gear that is completely seamless. You don't feel it. It's there to protect you. It functions great. But it all goes back to listening, and then, trying to come back with a solution, and vetting that solution with the player. And never taking it personal. Cause like I always tell guys like, hey, tell me the honest truth. Like if this really stinks, I want to hear it sooner rather than later. Like just don't sugarcoat it. Just come at it and just say, hey, no, this, no, stop. And so, cause then we'll go back, kind of huddle, and, hopefully come back with a better solution. So in a lot of ways, pretty simple, it's not rocket science.
What was do you recall the first player or first catcher that wore your guys' catcher's gear?
Oh gosh, no, I should know that, Tyler. That's a question for my dad. One of the first names that comes to mind is Rich Gedman, and a longtime Red Sox player, now in the coaching staff, and he's great. He lives not too far away in Worcester, about 20 minutes away, so he pops into the office all the time, and he's the kind of guy that you hang on every word. He knows about all the nuances of the position, and it's just amazing to kind of absorb that long, storied experience, with the game. But he's one of the guys I think back to the most, because I think partly because back at where I grew up at my parents' house, we had a clipping from the Boston Globe. It was like front cover Boston Globe, the main paper in Boston. And it's a picture of Rich Gedman, on a knee, all in our gear, at spring training. And so that's kind of like from an early memory, I kind of remember just seeing Eddie, in my house, all the time. And so he's one of the earliest guys, but we've had so many greats like Tony Pena as well, goes way back, which I'm finding the whole one knee down thing amazing, because Tony, and he's another guy, like, back when he was a bench coach for the Yankees, and I'd go into Fenway to see players, just listening to Tony talk, you could just sit there for hours and just absorb all this knowledge and all this insight from this legendary player. So
he just didn't look right without the mustache, though. Yankees made him shave that thing off.
It's true.
You have you probably have an encyclopedia in your back pocket of just everybody that you've been through and whatnot. I guess one of the questions that I have right out the gate is, it's probably a hard one to answer, but how many players are you guys servicing right now, as far as that are wearing your guys' gear, wearing your gloves?
It's a great question. So we measure it in a couple of ways. I mean, number one, we do have contracts with players, and that's from everyone from major league players down through the minor leagues. And and it's not like a crazy contract, to be perfectly honest. Like some people think like, oh, it's like tons of money involved. Well, no, I mean, we're a family business, and we make catcher's gear, which is a pretty, low margined, or, we make protective gear in particular, batting helmets, catcher's gear, kind of low margin when you look at footwear and, t-shirts and, compression base layers, so it's a pretty modest contract. I mean, it's mostly saying, hey, we're going to provide you gear, when you need it. And so on contract, we have kind of slightly north of 100 players on contract between, the majors and the minors. But then what we do is we look at different points throughout the year, opening day, the All-Star break, and then the September call-ups in particular, to kind of take a pulse of how many guys on the active roster and the 40-man roster are wearing a product. And that fluctuates over the years. If you go back to the 80s, in the early 90s, we had about like probably 90% of the players in our product. That was where the bigger monetary contracts came into play, and we'll just kind of keep it there, I guess. So yeah, like we cover like around 25% to 30%, plus or minus, depending on roster changes and what have you. When you start looking at, and that's talking about really the chest protector and the leg guards and the head protection, all one. When you look at things like the mitts, we're also about 30% of the active roster guys, again, plus or minus a little bit. When it comes to headgear, it's actually a lot higher just because we have a lot of guys with the brand, a different logo on their chest, who then reach out to us because they want something, shall I say, better, maybe. For their head. And the same thing is true with the mitt.
We can say that.
Yeah, we'll say it's better for. We'll definitely go out there and say it.
You have probably the greatest in my generation. You know, I wasn't around to watch bench play, but obviously watch videos and stuff. But you have arguably the greatest catcher ever that continues to wear your helmet every single time he's out, and Yadier Molina.
Oh yeah. I mean, Yadi, he's interesting. I mean, he is. Where do I start with Yadi? I mean, he's always worn our helmet, ever since his pro debut, and we no longer make that helmet any longer.
I have one with me right now, actually.
Oh wow,
yeah.
It's like my old Yankees one.
we get this throughout the years. I want the helmet that Yadi wears, and so we try to dig into well, why? Is it the aesthetics? Is it the performance? Is it the look, style, the way it feels? And I got to be honest, a lot of times it comes down to, and this is talking with major league players, minor league players, amateurs, it kind of comes down to it's Yachty. It's what Yachty wears, and so unfortunately, we don't make that helmet any longer. We have only a few left, to be perfectly honest, that are for Yachty. We've offered him other newer models in past years, but he's such a creature of habit that he doesn't want to change anything up. And we respect that. We, again, going back to where I started, we listen to the player and we listen to their needs. And every player is different. They receive differently, they set up differently. Every body type is different. So we never say to a player, you have to use a certain model. We've had plenty of guys, Mike Redmond, comes to mind. Mike Redmond, amazing guy. I love that guy. And he was kind of transitioning, kind of in his final years of play when I was coming into working with the pro players. And he was using the old cotton-filled CP20 Pro. And we kept making it for him, even though we probably stopped 10 years prior. But it's what he wanted. It's what he was comfortable with. He was kind of more of a bruiser. He didn't want so much protection. He wanted to feel the ball more. And so we kept doing that for him. Brian Pena, kind of a longtime backup catcher, our old CP25 Pro model, and Matt Trainer as well. And same thing with those two guys. They felt really comfortable with that. And I tried them, hey, here's a new product. Try it out. See what you like about it or don't like about it. Maybe make some tweaks. But they're just very set in what their comfort was with the old product. And so we don't Same thing goes with Jason Varitek. My dad has a story where he goes into Fenway with a new model, and we typically,
I think he wore the same glove for 10 years, never switched.
Close.
That thing looked old as dirt.
Yeah.
So Tech's gamer at any given time was probably 3 to 4 years old or older, and we would still give him 2 new custom mitts per season, but it took a long time for one of those mitts to become his gamer. And when he caught, was it the second no-hitter that he caught? The Hall of Fame, they basically approached him and said, hey, we really want your mitt for our museum. And he's like, you can't take my baby. No way. You guys totally get that. I mean,
yeah.
I love seeing those pictures, on social media where kids are traveling on an airplane and they've got their mitt next to them, buckled in, it's so true. You just don't ever let your mitt go out of your sight.
I used to, when I would get my glove order before spring training, I think I would get a box of 4 of them, and 2 of them I would use for spring training. The other ones I would hold off, throughout the year. But I know when I first got them, they would all be out of the plastic, and just the feeling of this fur right here. I mean, that's the best feeling. And I would sit there and I'm smelling the glove, and I actually would sleep with them. I would literally have them on one side of the bed, And my wife's like, really? You're sleeping with gloves? What are you, 10? And I go, well, sorry, nothing I can do on that. But I have a question regarding the helmets.
Yeah.
So the model that Yachty uses was the same one that I did, where it was a little bit wider off of the side, a little bit narrower in here. And now today's a little bit more, it's a little more aerodynamic, I guess. The thing that I loved about it was the vision, where when I would put on, going from the hockey style mask to the traditional, the bars felt like they were 6 feet in front of me and I just couldn't see. I would leave it on when there would be pop-ups. I would never take it off. But it was, and I know right now there's, with the technology, I remember when you guys first came out with the titanium cage, which all of a sudden guys were like, oh, the mask is light as a feather because of the titanium. And now you guys are using, what is it, magnesium? I believe I saw you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all great stuff. So, so being an engineer, I can get very long-winded and very detailed and go down lots of different rabbit holes and numbers and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, starting with what people commonly refer to as the hockey-style catcher's helmet, the motivation behind that was really, again, player-driven. We were working with Charlie, back in the day. And basically, Charlie called my dad and said, hey, I'm up here in Toronto. I'm kind of, playing around with some hockey goalie helmets. I think I could be more protected this way. What do you think? And my dad jumped on it. He said, this sounds terrific. This could be a great revolution in terms of, safety. And as they started doing some prototyping and testing, they realized, yeah, like, hey, we get some really good numbers out of this thing. And especially when we started thinking about backswings, which I'll come back to a little bit later, because that's something we're really focused a lot on right now is the kind of increased number of people getting hit with bats in the last couple of years. So anyway, so along the side of your head, you're definitely much better protected with a hockey style helmet just because you have something there, to put it very simply. So as they're developing this so-called hockey style helmet, which we never really called it the hockey style helmet, we're a baseball company, like it was it kind of more from a goalie helmet, but we called it the MVP, and we still refer to it as the MVP series. And MVP stands for maximum vision and protection. And so that vision part that you mentioned, Chris, is really important because with the bigger shell and more padding around your forehead and less rotation of the mask with this hockey style design, we can get the bars a little bit closer to your eyes. And certainly, the further away the bars get from your eyes, the more your vision gets clamped down in your range of view. So MVP was definitely, front and center. Like we definitely wanted to focus on the protective qualities. We wanted to focus on the vision qualities. Most of the time when people make the transition from the traditional two-piece to the one-piece, they do say, wow, I can see so much better out of this. I've had one guy say he didn't want to switch to the hockey style helmet because he saw too much. And I was like, that's a but hey, everyone's a little bit different. And maybe he just felt like he needed to be kind of more, tunnel visioned and focused, on the field in front of him. So that's sort of kind of like a bit about that. And one funny thing is we should probably post this at some point. We interviewed Charlie O'Brien a couple of years ago, and we just went down to Tulsa and just kind of popped in and just kind of in his living room, just did a sit down, like, hey, like, how did you come up with this, and how did it all go? It's a great piece, and he's such an amazing person. But it was funny to hear him say, like, he was really just motivated to protect himself. Like, he just wanted to protect himself better. And he wasn't thinking about kids. He wasn't thinking about the public. He just said, I just needed better protection for me, And so it was really kind of us who kind of jumped on it and brought it to the masses. And that's also a funny story too, because the first couple of years that my dad and the rest of our sales force were out going to trade shows, showing off this brand new concept that's changing the face of the game, all of our competitors were laughing at us. We had all the other major brands at that time, like pointing, laughing, saying, no one's ever going to wear that. And then maybe 2 or 3 years later, after independent groups such as Noxie did more testing, they changed the safety standard because they saw how much more coverage you have, how much better protection you have compared to a two-piece. So so that was kind of interesting because like basically they all make the hockey style helmet now, and not a whole lot of them make traditional face masks any longer. There's just not a lot of volume in them. But in terms of testing, like we get this question from parents and coaches and players all the time is like, what's the safest thing that you make? Is a two-piece safer because it flies off your face? Is a one-piece safer because it has more coverage? What about severity index and peak G measurements? And so, what I like to tell people is that, my job as an engineer is really to educate you on what we know and then be honest with what we don't know, because there's still so much we don't know with head trauma. I mean, we're always learning. We're going to concussion conferences throughout the year. We work with guys like Dr. Robert Cantu, who's down the street at Emerson Hospital. Big, huge knowledge base there in terms of sports-related concussions, CT and what have you. But we're always trying to learn. And I think one of the biggest things that I hear year over year at these concussion conferences is that we still don't know so much, and so we're still just trying to learn. So certainly you can say that less energy and less force is a good thing, so that's kind of where we try to go, I've got the air cannon behind us and we can do a little demo later. If you like. So we're measuring really two things. We're measuring severity index, which is what NOXI uses, and we use the peak. We measure the peak G. Is it okay if I get a little geeky here and start drawing curves? And,
absolutely.
Go right ahead.
So I've got a little handy dandy board here, and
love it.
And so this is where I really put my nerd hat on and totally geek out.
But it's an all-star nerd hat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
If you think about an impact, and hopefully you can maybe get a little closer here on the screen for those who are watching. I'll try to describe it as best I can in words for those who are listening to a podcast version. So, if you have a graph and on the horizontal axis you have time, and on the vertical axis you have force, at time equals 0, there's basically no contact. Like it's just before the ball hits the mask and the mask starts compressing on your head. So as time goes on, you start to get a bell curve that looks something like this. And that's, in principle, it's actually a lot more jagged. There's a lot more noise, but you kind of smooth it all out with some filters. And so you look at a couple things. One, you should look at the top. Okay, this is the peak G. Peak G being, basically a measurement of force. And then the other thing we look at is the area under the curve. And so the area under the curve is really the total energy. And the severity index that NOXI uses is more or less the integration of this curve or the area under the curve to like the 2.5 power. But in principle, just think about it as the total energy. So those are two really important things, the total energy and the maximum force. And it really depends on kind of what range you're talking, because sometimes one might be more important than the other, because you can take things like the ping of a baseball, like a fastball. It's very short duration, very high peak G perhaps, but this is all within like 10 milliseconds. It's like really, really short duration, high peak. You can take another impact that might be like the thud of a football helmet, and it might look something more like this. And sure, in terms of the peak G, it's like, oh yeah, I'd want to get hit with this smaller, lower curve. But when you start looking at things like the area under the curve, this lower peak G impulse actually has more energy in it, and perhaps that's
longer over time.
Yeah, exactly. So in some ways, it might sound counterintuitive that you want something with a higher peak G because it's such a short duration versus a lower peak G and a longer duration. Because it's all about the energy. But these are still areas where we don't know. I mean, there's some rules of thumb out in the literature and the researchers in terms of certain thresholds. But the biggest thing that we've known this for many years is that every person is different in terms of how they respond to a head blow. And back in June at one of the two meetings of NOXI every year, again, Dr. Robert Cantu got up and gave kind of like a state of the science, like where are we with science in terms of TBI and head trauma. And he said that, look, we've known for many years that every person is different in terms of how they respond. But what's new is how vastly different people actually are. So, some people will be affected by a very, very small peak G, and others won't even, no effect whatsoever. They have a much higher threshold. So that variation between people is much bigger than we ever knew. So anyway, so that's a little bit of like kind of what those are the two key measurements that we measure here in the lab, is basically the severity index and the peak G. So where I go with people is I say, hey, look, again, there's nothing that's concussion proof, especially if you're talking about repeated, subconcussive blows, multiple foul tips, multiple tackles in football, multiple headers. It's typically an accumulation of trauma over time that then triggers a concussion. But in terms of, one impact, what I tell people is that a lot of our products test very, very similar. So within like the noise of the experiment. So any type of measurement you take, whether it's, I could say, hey, let's all four of us, measure the length of this marker. And depending on what tools we use, and even if we use the same tool, we're probably all going to have a slightly different measurement, just because we hold the calipers slightly different. So in any measurement system, there's noise. And so in the setup behind me, if you look at an independent lab like a Southern Impact Research Center or ICS or Chesapeake, they measure that uncertainty of the measurement. And it's typically around 40 to 50 SI. So what that means statistically, if you have two numbers that are within 40 to 50 SI of each other, they're more or less the same, and especially when you start thinking about the threshold. NOXI sets the threshold at 1,200. And I won't get into the details of meeting the NOXI standard, because it's not just good enough to say, hey, I'm below 1,200. You have to show that over time with quality control testing, which is largely what we do in here. We test about around 2,000 to 3,000 helmets a year. Both batting helmet face guards, catcher's helmets, face masks. You have to show over time that your average is more than 3 standard deviations below that threshold. Sorry, I'm probably getting way too geeky on this.
This is good.
So commonly, I hear from parents all the time, like, hey, what's safer, the hockey style helmet or the traditional face mask? And first I just say, well, look, it's not like you can say, all brands of hockey style helmets are the same and all traditional face masks from all brands, are the same. Like it really comes down to the specific models. In the context of what we offer here at All-Star, they're all very, very similar, especially the frontal impact. So when we're testing, at ball speeds, 90, 100, 120 miles per hour, we get very, very similar numbers on the front for foul tips. So with the one exception, and I don't want to sound negative, but our titanium mask scores the worst, and it's definitely an outlier. Our magnesium is our best testing right now. Our steel has always been a very good testing product in terms of the traditional face mask. And then really a lot of our hockey style helmets are very good. And I have to be careful about like talking about numbers here, but in very broad brushstrokes, on average, we get around like 50 SI on our titanium mask. And that's really good, but our steel masks typically are about half of that, like in the 20-25 SI range, plus or minus. Of course, there's some variation depending on nose, eye socket, forehead, but those are just like big gross numbers. So in some ways I can say, going from 25 SI on a steel traditional mask to 50 SI on a titanium mask, that's double the SI, that's double the energy. It's 100% worse, than the steel. But the reality is that 50 SI is still very good. It's a pretty low number. But I just like to be honest with people, because that's what we know. For me, I'm pretty conservative. I want the lowest, SI peak G product for me personally. And maybe that's what makes us a bit different here at All-Star, is that we're a family business. And, whether it's my dad or me or my brother, we've got like one foot here in the test lab and the other foot on the field talking to the player. So when I'm talking with like Martin Maldonado or Jonathan Lucroy, and we're talking about product, like I'm giving them stuff only what I would want to wear myself, and actually that's a good example. Is like Jonathan Lucroy, I told him, years ago, like, hey, like, this is the titanium is lightweight. Yeah, it's sexy because it's titanium, but it does score higher than any other product we make. Just FYI, don't be concerned, but just there it is. And he did have a concussion wearing the titanium mask. And, and this is also maybe some good insight into how we develop products, because in talking with Luke about this, like he believes that the foul tip was off center, so the mask rotated, and the metal bar hit his jaw, and therefore transferred more energy into his head.
Huh.
And so as we're developing the magnesium mask, I've got one right here. So this magnesium mask is very interesting because, I mean, honestly, like since we started working with titanium, we've been trying to find something better than titanium, because if you look at a lot of the titanium product on the market, it does test higher than steel. And a lot of people talk like there's just frankly poor journalism out there. The journalism kind of scratches the surface and says, oh, it's because titanium is so lightweight, and because it's lighter, it doesn't absorb the energy. Force equals mass times acceleration, and with such a low mass, like there's not enough to absorb it. It's like being in a Mini Cooper versus being on a Humvee. It's not quite that way. We're talking about differences of a couple ounces. And when we test it back here, like, heavy mass versus lighter mass, weight does not affect the peak G or the severity index as much as you might think. It has a lot more to do with the stiffness of the material. So titanium, if you're using a titanium alloy like we do and like other brands do, it's very, very stiff, which is great for durability because it'll probably be the last mask you ever buy. It'll just last for years. But because it's so much stiffer, there's no give. And so then more force is then transferred into the padding system. And maybe you kind of exceed what the padding system can really handle. I've heard stories, not from our product, from other brands, that the player, who I'm thinking of one in particular, felt the bar of another brand's titanium mask make contact with his chin. And the point here is it's a total.
Wow, you don't want that.
And it's a total system, right? Like you can't just say, oh, titanium is bad, don't use it. You have to think about, well, what kind of padding you're putting behind it. Think about suspension in a car. You've got, sport utility vehicles have a lot stiffer suspension. You've got, pickup trucks that have stiff suspension, or you've got like a Lincoln Town car that has very soft suspension. They're built for very different elements and different loadings. And so it's really no different than, talking about what kind of loading you have here, because with steel, it's nice because steel will bend with a big enough impact. And I would much rather give a player a new steel mask that is bent, because in bending, it's all about physics. You got this ball coming at you, it's got kinetic energy, and as soon as that ball makes contact, certainly you want to deflect the ball as much as possible, because then that energy kind of gets deflected, but there's still some energy transferred. And once that energy is transferred, it has to go somewhere. If the bars bend, that's great, because just think about grabbing a piece of metal in your hands and trying to bend it. Like, it takes energy to bend it. So that's sucking up energy. And then whatever's left over is going into the padding system to get absorbed even more. So it's a total system. So going back to Lucroy, he was talking about his experience getting a bar to the jaw. And he said, well, hey, could you ever just drop the padding maybe like a half an inch below the bottom perimeter? And I said, Luke, that's perfect. I mean, it makes total sense, because yeah, certainly I don't want a mask rotating and having the bar make contact with your face. But if you think about how a mask compresses and the bars compress, that bottom perimeter more or less slides off the padding, because it's right on the perimeter of the padding. Not every single situation, but in certain angles that happens. So by dropping the padding about a half an inch below that bottom perimeter, we're getting more energy transfer of the bar into the padding system, and that's a good thing. And then Luke basically dug up an old face mask that was the FM 1500 It was specifically marketed towards the umpire. It had a plastic plate in the chin. It looked awful, to be honest. I mean, it just didn't look.
That's why it was the ump, right?
It basically lived for 1 year and then just died. But it got Luke thinking, like, hey, what if you put a plastic plate, in the jaw area? And I said, well, Luke, that kind of makes a lot of sense, because comparing a hockey style helmet to a traditional face mask, we get very, very good, consistent low numbers. Sometimes, a little bit lower than traditional face masks. But again, it's within that noise and measurement, so you can't say really one's safer than the other. But part of our thinking is that with the hockey style helmet, you've got a different system. it's not just the metal bars onto padding. You've got metal bars onto a shell, then onto padding. So you have this other interface that you have to go through. This plastic shell helps disperse the energy over a broader area. You then use more padding to absorb that blow versus point loading a very specific location on your chin or your forehead. So we made some samples where we dropped the padding below the perimeter, but then we also made some samples with the dropped padding below the bottom perimeter, but also inside here was a plastic plate. Because that umpire model just didn't look right, having the plastic plate standing out in front there. So we concealed it instead. And, it was, in this room where I'm testing it, we got like a 10G savings just by dropping the bottom perimeter. And then when we had the plastic in there, we had like another 10 Gs. And so on net, we had like a 20G savings. That sounds like a lot, but I like to put this in real context, because some people, hear things like, oh, fighter pilots in, fighter jets will pass out when they have like a G-force of like 4 Gs, I think, or something around there. So you're like 20 Gs, oh my gosh, like that is huge, like what you're doing. Well, it's 4 Gs sustained over like the arc of a pitched turn, and whereas back, like I said earlier, the energy is transferred from the ball to the head form in less than 10 milliseconds. It's just in a blink of an eye. So in that context, 20 Gs is really not a whole lot more than doing a jumping jack. Because I think when you measure jumping jacks, it's about 15 Gs per jump, if I'm not mistaken. And so I like to just kind of, again, be very honest with people, what we know, what we don't know. And yeah, you can say, well, like a 20 G savings is really not huge. It's not much bigger than the variation in testing that you have. But if we're moving the needle lower, we want to go that way. It just makes sense. Anecdotally, we hear a lot of great stories from guys who use this, whether it's Lucroy, Nick Schufo's got some stories, and, he's in the minor leagues with the Texas Rangers right now. Multiple guys have just said that they feel a difference. It's anecdotal, but part of it is also the design too. Like we're really trying to make the ball skim off one way or the other. So when we take the high-speed camera and look down on the impact, we can never really get a ball to get stuck. Because with the traditional mask that has the old school kind of upside down U shape, it's a perpendicular surface. So if you shoot that just right, we get the ball basically hits it, kind of gets stuck, and then just drops down. Whereas with this design, you're skimming either way, and that helps. I mean, that's like your first line defense. The more you can deflect the ball, the better. Going back to the hockey style helmet, that was a lot of the design drive for a more aerodynamic look. Have more glancing blows, less perpendicular shots, just to kind of get less direct perpendicular shots to the mask. Have I gone too deep down the rabbit hole?
No, that is unbelievable. I was just going to make a comment about the design of that, because I have one of the old hockey style masks with me right now, and just looking at the bar shapes. I mean, that's the one thing that I'm just kind of amazed by, is just how different it is. It's not has any curvature to it, but it's unbelievable. Yeah, it's just great. I have a couple guys that I train as well, and they use the magnesium mask and they love it.
That's great. Yeah, it takes a little bit of adjustment because, like going back to materials, like magnesium is really cool because it's lighter than titanium, but it behaves like steel, meaning that with a big enough impact, it will bend. And so, and again, that's okay. I want it to bend and absorb that energy. That's much more important than sending more energy into your head and your brain. That said, we've had very few bend in the field. Actually, that's a funny story with Chris Jimenez. I don't know if you guys have ever met him, but he's amazing. He's now working with Ryan Cienko, who you had on the over the Dodgers. And I've known Chris for so many years. And so he was one of the early adopters of the magnesium. And one day he sends me a text and he's like, "Hey Stan, I took a foul ball, in today's afternoon game. It bent, and you sent me a picture, like the eye opening's wider." And I said, "Whoa, Chris, don't use it. I don't want a ball going through, at all. I'm going to send you one. I'll next day air it, but I can't do it until tomorrow. So you have like basically 1 or 2 days where you just have to go back to your old backup mask." And so that was probably at night. I get into work next day, get this, next day aired him a new mask. And that later that night, as this mask is in transit to him, he sends me a text, says, "Hey Stan, no need to send me a mask because I took another foul tip and now the eye opening's back closed again." And I was like, no. Like, just put that mask in the trash. Like your head is more important. But that's really only one of like a couple times that has happened where the magnesium.
Wow.
Because I mean, again, it's I think people think about extreme sports and they're like, baseball, it's really not that extreme. It's just a team sport. But dude, if you're face to face with a 100-mile-per-hour fastball, it's extreme. And we still don't know about backspin. When certainly a foul ball physically cannot have more linear speed because you're hitting against it in the opposite direction. So it can't be going any faster, linearly. But you've introduced spin, and that spin is a lot of energy. And this is probably a really bad analogy, but my Polish lineage will come through here with my great aunt. They used to be on TV on Saturday mornings, bowling, and so when you're bowling, people hook the ball, not really to hit the pins at an angle. It's because they learned over time that all that spin of the bowling ball is energy, and that spin, once it hits the pins, makes the pins go flying everywhere, much more than just a regular rolling ball. So again, it's probably not a very good analogy, but it's still, it's real that you're introducing spin that was not there. I mean, certainly some guys have crazy, spin. Like we used to work with Mets, Seth Lugo, who I think has the highest spin velocity ever measured with StatCast, which I don't know how they measure that. It's just unbelievable the stuff they can measure now. But certainly having more spin definitely has more energy. When it makes contact, it has to go somewhere. So, but again, that's again another area where we don't know. No one's able to study it in a repeatable fashion. What spin does in the context of a helmet.
So you were talking a little bit, Stan, about backswings.
Yeah,
something that you're testing now. What are you guys looking into with that?
Yeah. So can I take you on a little tour?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So behind me, we've got the air cannon, kind of like right behind here, head form. We also have the Noxie thoracic surrogate here for doing the chest pressure testing, which I'll be happy to tell you about that more too. But let me unplug here and take my laptop around. So basically, let's see if I can do this at the same time, talk and chew gum. So we have air cannon. Like it sounds, it's pressurized air, shoots out baseballs, softballs, lacrosse balls. And then over here is our wonderful assistant. This is the small head form, basically the youth size. We have 3 different sizes. So if we step over here, we have, let's see. Yes, we've got basically the medium head form, which is like your normal average adult size. This guy is the large head form, which is sort of like a football linebacker. Really enormous.
That's Chris's head right there.
You might be wondering why we have this white paste, and truth be told, this is Desitin, like baby diaper butt paste.
Oh yeah.
We do that because when we're testing, catcher's face mask or batting helmet face guards, we want to make sure there's no contact of the ball to the face, and no contact of the bars to the face. So anytime you kind of hit, the bar, to kind of leave a mark on the paste, and if it ever makes contact, you'd see it on the ball as well. So then over here, this looks a little bit plain right now because the head form is not on it. But this is the drop rig right here, where we take one of the head forms and mount it, and you can get all different kinds of positions. You go up and down, you can rotate it, so you can hit a wide range of areas on the head form. And we do that to simulate getting hit with a baseball bat. So what we do is, I'll go down here now. This is really fun using a laptop as a So here, if you can see it, is a metal anvil, and it's round. It's a half cylinder. So basically, picture a baseball bat, and we're dropping the head form down onto this anvil. So we take the head form, we put a catcher's helmet on it or a skull cap, and we drop it down. And that's all well and fine, but when you think about the physics, getting hit by a baseball bat, you're not whacking your head on the ground. You're getting hit, and your head keeps moving after it. And that's back to the air cannon the head form is on a sliding rail system, which is meant to simulate how your neck, responds after getting hit. And so when we've been thinking about this for years, thinking, gosh, like this is not really correct, about it's just not the right physics. It's certainly better than nothing, but is it really truly measuring or simulating what's happening in the real world? So we started playing around with some things like, well, how do we swing a bat? And how do we swing it in a repeatable way? And we first started with a clay pigeon shooter, like for rifle shooting. And it was great. We could swing a bat pretty hard, but it was very wobbly and not very precise. So we worked with a local college. One of my colleagues, Rich, he went to Worcester Polytech, WPI, just down the street in Worcester. And they have an awesome program with their engineering school where they have, your senior year, you just do a design project. And so we worked with the WPI engineers to basically develop this bat swinger. And it's awesome. Basically, we can, deliver a blow to the head form in a very precise, repeatable way. So what we do here is we have another sliding neck for the head form. We put the head form here. We mount the helmet, or I've got all kinds of skull caps we're working on, and then we can deliver a really hard blow, right to the side. So there's really nothing more realistic to simulate getting hit with a baseball bat than getting hit with a baseball bat. So that's what we're working on. We have some stuff that basically was just getting seeded to spring training as spring training was shut down. It's a better, higher performance skull cap that has some augmented padding in it and a really, really nice removable washable liner, to put it really simply. Still a plastic shell. It's polycarbonate, which is more dense than ABS. And ABS is what we use, primarily. It's a special blend of ABS where it's just a high impact, crack resistant ABS that we use. But polycarbonate is what we use for our pro catcher's helmets, our pro hockey style catcher's helmets, and what we're using for the skull cap. It's just even more crack resistant than ABS.
Cool.
A bit more dense. And actually, this is an interesting thing too, like going back to Yachty's helmet. So Yachty's helmet is fiberglass reinforced with Kevlar on the forehead. And back when I started here in 2005, we started looking at, hey, how do we make that helmet lighter? Because one of the complaints from guys was, hey, I want to wear your hockey style helmet, but it's heavy, so much heavier than a traditional two-piece. And so when I started getting into it, we chose that type of polycarbonate, which we were already using on a batting helmet. We developed it with GE, and it was really nice because this polycarbonate has amazing crack resistance or tear resistance. So to give you an example, like the last thing we want to happen to anyone is to have a helmet crack. And if it cracks, the first crack is really not bad at all. In fact, you get really low numbers. And I should have said this earlier, low is better. Low peak G, low severity index, the lower, the better, because that means less energy, less force, which is, again, a good thing. So then with, doing the impact testing, but also be less crack resistant, because after you take that first crack, you get very, very low numbers because, again, think about ripping plastic open. That takes energy to tear that plastic. This is not that different than a bicycle helmet or a motorcycle helmet. They're a one and done type of design. The EPS material that's used in bicycle helmets and motorcycle helmets is designed to crack and fracture, and that absorbs a tremendous amount of energy on that one hit. So the problem is we can't use materials like that in baseball because oftentimes you're going to take multiple hits over the course of a season, a week, maybe even a day. So that first crack in a catcher's helmet, not so bad. The second crack can be catastrophic because you've started that tear and now the shell is compromised and it flexes a lot more. And typically that second crack or once you have the first crack, once you hit it again, it cracks even easier. And that's not a good thing. But our polycarbonate blend is different. You get that first crack, it might be 1/8 of an inch. You hit it again at 100 miles per hour, and it might tear another 1/8 of an inch. You hit it a third time at 100 miles an hour, and it tears another 1/8 of an inch. It just keeps tearing a little bit, almost like a ripstop type of fabric. So that made us feel really good because in the context of Major League Baseball, you're in this big stadium, it's loud, it's noisy, you get hit, you have some adrenaline pumping, you might not think to check your helmet super careful. And we don't want a guy to then put it back on with a crack, take another foul tip back to back that inning, and the next thing you know, his helmet just splits wide open and he's injured. That would be horrible. So when we're developing, trying to find this replacement for, the helmet that Yachty uses, is one of the design challenges was how do we make a new helmet be more tear resistant, crack resistant than the fiberglass with reinforced Kevlar? And that was a pretty high hurdle. But believe it or not, that polycarbonate actually tests better head to head. So basically behind me, we would do head to head competitions. So we would take the Kevlar fiberglass shell, rifle as many balls as it took to get that first crack, and note that, and then keep on firing and see how much bigger that crack got with every successive blow. And then we did the same thing with the polycarbonate shells. It performed better. It just and so that was like, all right, good, we got it. We got a material that performs better than what we had, and let's go forward with it. So yeah, so that kind of, I'm kind of going down again another rabbit hole.
No,
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, but that's, it's all. It sounds, it's all cannibalistic kind of here. Like we're always just breaking stuff and just trying to see how do we make it better. Where does it break? Let's make it stronger there. Let's try to break it again. Oh, it breaks somewhere else. Hey, let's improve that spot. And you could say like, well, that sounds like very old school. Why don't you do a lot of like mathematical, finite element analysis modeling? And we could, but oftentimes it doesn't really work, to be perfectly honest.
You gotta have trial and error with like real reality that's happening to the guys.
Absolutely.
Stan, could you shoot a couple?
Yeah, definitely. So so let me so it's like let's see, can you see? Yeah, that's so again, this is the youth head form. I've just got, this is a helmet that's been tested. Just kind of grabbed it out of Lewis, our technician. He's had on the rack. Pop it on, and it's basically like an old muzzle loader. You put the ball in. We have a little plunger here, and then.
Is this going to be loud?
It is. So you might, but it'll probably be okay. You might want to take your headphones off. But for those listening, hopefully it won't be too loud. I'm gonna put earmuffs on because it is really loud in here. And so you have like a little pointer, which you might be able to see in the video here, and that gives us basically where the ball is going to hit. I've got it targeted basically at the forehead of the catcher's helmet, and we'll pull this back. Let me make sure the air pressure's on. Yep, we're good. Close the door.
Wow.
Scared me.
That was loud.
Warning. So that was at 95 miles per hour. If you can see, maybe up top here, we have a velocity meter, and then we smudged the logo. And in terms of the numbers, let's see, I can pull it over here. Sorry, I usually do this differently where I show everything to reset. I can go back and do this again, but down here on this analog computer, it says 21. That's the severity index. So again, very, very low number, especially for 95 miles per hour, and a 41 peak G. So that's testing for you. So then let's see. Do you want to see another one?
Let's do
Absolutely. Let it fly.
Using a laptop as a camera, but all right, here we go. So 3 on the count of 1, I'll pull the trigger. 3, 2, 1.
Whoa.
I mean, it's just so fast you don't even see it. It's
wow.
like the blink of an eye, and then here, let's see. So that was 97.79 miles per hour, and severity index of 13. So that's a really nice number, and a peak G of 35. So there you go. And just there, you can see that. I think the first one we did was like 20 some odd.
Yeah, because that one was less
at the point of contact. Well, but the I don't say the problem. This equipment is not designed to measure very low numbers. So the precision at such low numbers is all over the place. So what we know from years of testing is that, because going back, let me sit down, and so I'll get the handy dandy whiteboard. So again, if you're thinking about time on the horizontal axis and the force on the vertical axis, I was drawing nice curves like this, like nice bell curves. But in reality, there's a lot of noise, and it's kind of jagged, and it might have actually another peak here. It doesn't look that pretty. So in terms of the circuitry, picking off the peak G is a pretty simple part of the computation. That's pretty repeatable. Like, especially as our numbers get lower and lower, the peak G is much steadier and more repeatable than the severity index. The severity index, again, is the area under the curve to the 2.5 power, I think it is. So any sort of difference to the shape can really throw off that severity index number. Plus, it's getting filtered. So you have the introduction of some other factor that's changing the value when you start filtering the curve to be a less of a jagged curve to a more pretty curve to do the calculation. That's probably the best I can do to explain it, is that we're getting so low that there's more variation with the severity index and less variation with the peak G. So it's not uncommon to see them flip-flop when you're at such low values.
Gotcha.
Are you guys using any high-speed cameras?
Yeah, definitely. You see a lot of really cool things with high-speed cameras. So one of the things I hear, and you guys probably hear this too, or believe, especially in the umpire world for whatever reason, is that a two-piece mask is safer than a hockey style because the mask can spin off and just blow off your face. And while earlier I had said, yeah, like deflection is a good thing because the more you can deflect the energy, there's less energy to absorb. But when you think about a mask, basically spinning off of your face, in order to spin off your face, it has to pivot on something. And it's basically pivoting on your cheek. And so what we've done is we've taken, over here on our kind of cube where all the ball ricochets, the top panel is plexiglass. And so we do video right from the top down to get a nice vertical, look down on the impact, as well as filming through the front here. And so when you look down from above, you get to see some really neat things. One is that when we do off-center shots to spin the mask off the head form, I mean, to the naked eye and to regular speed video, it looks like the mask just flies off the face. But in the high-speed camera, when you slow it down, you see what's really happening is the mask is fully loading and compressing on that side and then rebounding off of the face. The mask is coming completely off the face, and because it's on this elastic harness, it's pulling elastic harness and then slinging to the side and coming off. So again, in the blink of an eye, it looks like it just blew off your face, but it's actually completely loaded the head form, rebounded, has come completely off the head form, and then swung around to the side. So that's.
I would love to see that video.
You got to post that one.
Well, I try. I'm not exactly the most diligent poster on Instagram, but I try to do Testing Tuesday.
Tyler is.
So I'll have to put down the docket to put up there because it is really interesting. Kind of similar thing that again, we're just a bunch of geeks. Like we think about first principles and let's just go by the numbers and like see what happens. So a number of years ago, someone came to us with this patented harness design that is at like a 45-degree angle. And he said that this harness basically allows the mask to fly off the face much more easily. And therefore it dissipates or deflects, I think he said like 70% of the energy, which again, it's kind of weird. He had no numbers from a lab, it's just based on his experience. We said, well, hey, look, if this is factual, that sounds great, but let's test it. And so what we did right here is we took, we have our neoprene elastic harness. So we put, we use the same exact mask as the FM25 steel mask, same padding system, same bars. The only thing that we're changing was the harness. So we had our Delta Flex neoprene harness. We then had our traditional nylon elastic harness. We had this guy's other harness that was nylon elastic, but at a 45-degree angle on the head, kind of sticking to the top back of your head. And then as a fourth, we put a mask with no harness. we basically put a cardboard box underneath the mask to balance it up against the head form. So it had absolutely no harness whatsoever. So there, you're kind of testing all conditions. Does the material, the harness matter? Does the angle of the harness matter? Does having a harness at all matter? And what we found was that you got all the same numbers, again, within that measure of variability, because with the high-speed camera, in all cases, you're seeing that the mask was fully loading before it ever spinned off, before it ever rebounded. It just happens so fast. So, I can appreciate why people think that a two-piece is safer because it spins off, but it just ends up, it's kind of like Mythbusters. It's like, no, it's been debunked, like it doesn't really happen that way. But going back to numbers, like I said earlier, it's like my job is to tell people what we know and what we don't know. And, then they can make the decision that's best for them, because I also believe that you have to be comfortable in what you use. It's, especially at the highest levels.
Absolutely.
It's a mental thing, right? It's a mental game. I don't want guys being distracted. I don't want guys, I've had one guy say that he can't wear a hockey style helmet because he feels claustrophobic. Well, don't wear it, like that's.
Well, I have a question then. So with me coaching high school this year, and obviously with a son who's a year away from high school, and with all the kids that I train who are in high school. Now, up here in New York, they all have to wear the hockey style. Like they've made that mandatory. They have to wear that. But yet this is saying that it's from a deflection standpoint and impact, that the traditional is actually safer regarding impacts.
I don't think there's any data to support that. It's, and I'll fall back on Noxie. They're the ones that set the safety standards. And again, it's really hard to say that all hockey style helmets are equivalent and all traditional two pieces are equivalent, because again, titanium, steel, magnesium, how dense your pads are, that all really affects things. So it's really hard to say, that they're all created equal when they're a hockey style helmet, and they're all the same when they're a two piece, because they really aren't. There's so much variation from the different brands and even within the different brands. So for me, again, being a family business and telling people what I would use or have my children wear, I do the hockey style, the one piece, especially because we're seeing so many guys get hit with bats now. Especially at the pro ranks, Major League, minor league, we're seeing more and more of that. In the last, I'd say 3 seasons, we've had more guys in the pro ranks, both Major League, minor league, switch to the hockey style helmet. And it's almost, I wouldn't say never, but it's almost always true that once someone switches to the hockey style helmet, they don't switch back. You guys had Tucker Barnhart on earlier, a couple weeks ago, and Tucker, when we first started working with him, it really started with the helmet, and he was a hockey style guy. Then when he kind of went away from All-Star on the gear, he went to the two piece. This year he was kind of coming back to it and playing around with it, but it was still kind of on the fence, I think, during spring training on what he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But he's one of only a couple of guys I can think of that have kind of switched back. I've had other guys like John Baker, back when he was on, I think it was the Marlins. He came up through Fenway one time and he just switched. And this is years and years ago, but he said, well, and at Fenway, again, I'm always curious why guys make choices, like why did you decide this? Why did you decide that? Just to learn from it. And so I said to John, hey, John, how come a couple of weeks ago you reached out to us for a hockey style helmet? Like what's, motivation there? And he said, well, Stan, like the day that I was bleeding out of my ear, I thought that maybe I just had to have a change, because I guess he took a massive backswing and that was kind of the wake up call. So as much as I say like it's personal preference, I think that's really true at the professional level when you're an adult and you can make your own choices. For kids, I still think that the hockey style helmet is more adequate. You have much more coverage. Sometimes you're up against batters who don't have very good control of their backswing. There's just more room for error, I think at the amateur level. So that's my personal feeling, but again, it's, hey, we're in the US, you should have, personal choices and freedoms. But again, my job is really just, hey, this is what we know. This is what we don't know. And then you make the choice that's best for you.
So we've talked a lot about the gear and the protective stuff, which is unbelievable to hear the design and the science and everything behind it. I want to switch over a little bit to gloves. Do you recall, was Tex the first guy that wore your guys' glove? When did you start designing gloves? And then we can have a shameless plug by one of our co-hosts here to talk about his trainer that he designed for you guys. So I guess my first question then is when did you guys start getting in the glove making business?
Well, it was really, I'll try to not mention brands, but basically it was a point in, I'd say, the late 80s, early 90s, where we started losing some market share in terms of the gear. And what the Achilles heel was the mitt. A lot of guys were dropping our catcher's gear to go to this brand's mitt, and then it was like a head-to-toe type of deal. And so our dad started kind of playing around with things. I can't remember who the first guy to use our mitt was. I should know that. But here's kind of a short history of the evolution, is that the first couple of years out, we had the solid tan mitt and the solid black mitt. And I see Chris smiling here. You probably remember that to some extent, Chris.
I love the tan one. That was my favorite. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so the feedback, again, going right to the players, what's working, what's not, is that the was like a broken, great pocket formed, loud pop, made the pitchers throw feel like throwing 200 miles an hour. Great feedback. But a couple months in the season, it was a rag. It just got too floppy. The solid black mitt, on the other hand, it took longer to break in, but it lasted longer. And so, and it's the same exact leather. It's just tan two different ways, which then affects the physical properties of the leather. So then after hearing, this feedback for a couple of seasons, my dad said, well, hey, we should just make it like a Reese's Pieces, bring the best of both worlds together. And so basically have the tan on the inside for, again, that great shape of the pocket, the great pop, the great break-in. But then on the back shell, use the stiffer black leather to help give it some support for more longevity. And this is one thing I've found fascinating, is how mitts have changed, I'd say probably in the last 5 to 6 years. And we don't fiddle around with things. If it ain't broke, don't fix. Actually, this just reminds me of back, I was at the Brewers for spring training years and years ago. Both Lucroy and Maldonado were there. I think we had about 6 guys around a round table, and I'm showing them new product. And one of the minor leaguers looked at me and said, hey, are you making any changes to your mitt? And I was like, ooh, no. I was kind of feeling defensive here. I was like, should we? What's up? And he just says, no, make no changes. Don't change your mitt at all. And I was like, okay. So we're very conservative when it comes to the mitts. Like we use great leather, great patterns, and really we don't want to vary much from that. We're not going to do funky colors and crazy back shell materials, because it all ultimately affects the performance. But what's been fascinating to me is really, like the last 5 or 6 years, we've had so many guys switch to our solid black mitt. And then this year, so many guys switched to our 34-inch mitt. There you go, Tyler. Nice. So, and what, again, just based on the feedback and what we're hearing is, we had the black and tan, and that was the only thing we offered for so many years. And then we had guys like Jose Molina who said, hey, can you make a solid black? I'm sorry, it was Benji Molina, the older brother. Benji, he's talking to my dad. He's like, hey, can you make a solid black mitt? And initially, kind of just started off just because I want to be different. Everyone has a black and tan mitt, and Benji, he gave so much great feedback on all of our product for so many years. My dad said, sure, why not? Here's an all black mitt. And back to like the original all black mitt, it was stiffer, took longer to break in, but Benji liked it that way. And then I think the next guy was Jose, his brother, who wanted one. So we made one for him. And I think the third one was Martin Maldonado. And he called me up and he's like, I shouldn't do an impersonation. He's like, oh, Stan, hey, it's Martin. Can you make an all black mitt for me? Martin, like, I'd love to, but it's just, we're kind of just doing it for Jose and Benji, like they're just kind of close, they've done a lot of development with us. And then Martin's like, well, hey, I'm getting Benji's old mitts anyway. And I'm like, okay, sure. So, and then we kept getting, more guys asking for it. And again, like we kept asking, like, well, why? Is it an aesthetic thing? Is it a color thing? And actually, that was a cool story. So, do you guys remember Coy Hill by any chance?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. So Coy, I love this story. So, because I had guys like kind of like after Martin, asked me for an all black mitt, and the reason was that it just didn't get dirty as much as the tan mitt. And I was like, okay, that's kind of functional, but it's still not a real kind of physical functional difference, and as an engineer, like I want to hear like a real reason. So Coy had this really cool story where when he was growing up in middle school, his mom would not let him have black high tops. Like he was on a basketball team, middle school basketball team, everyone probably had, all black Jordans. And his mom said, Coy, you cannot have black high tops. And Coy's like, why, Mom? Like all the cool kids have them, like I want to have black. He says, nope, you have to have white. And the whole reason was that she felt that kids who had black high tops, their feet looked slower. And she didn't want the coach thinking that he was slow, that he, and so then Coy's thinking about this and he's like, well, hey, if I've got an all black mitt and it looks, and if it's anything like these black high tops that look slow, will my all black mitt look slower to an umpire? Like, will I get more pitches in my,
Wow. Okay.
and I said,
Okay, that's an interesting feed.
yeah. And again, being the geek that I am, I was like, Coy, that makes 100% sense, because our eyes detect motion largely by seeing light and seeing how, and how lines move. And with the black and tan, you've got these pretty clear, distinct lines between the black and the tan leather. They're very clear, visible things that you can see move. But once it's all black, it's much more stealth. I mean, maybe that's why stealth fighter jets are all black.
Yeah.
But it's just, it kind of conceals more. So I was like, Coy, you just earned yourself an all black mitt. So,
There
but
you go.
then
Do you, Stan? Do you remember? Now, your dad made this for me, and I threw out the idea one time. I think it was in 2000, and we were going through gloves, and I think it was the same year where I drew up the design for the CM 100.
yeah,
But I had said, the hardest thing, especially when you're playing in the humidity and you got moisture everywhere, guys are always tightening up their thumb. And your dad actually made my gloves had a Velcro thumb for it. So it was very low, like it was set up down here almost on the very edge to keep the thumb locked in, but it was just a piece of Velcro that would boom snap it in every time. And
cool.
they did that for when I played, and then they stopped making it. Yeah, I don't know if anyone ever went off and used that besides me, but I always thought that was something that's just more convenient for him, instead of always having to tighten. Everybody's always tightening up the thumb and grabbing their laces and pulling here, pulling there. And yeah, so that was one of the cool things when I threw out that idea. He was just like, he goes, yeah, let me put a Velcro and let me know how it was. And the guys that I were playing were like, where the heck did you get that? I'm like, oh, pays to know somebody, I guess. So
That's great, Chris. I'm going to have to dig that up and see what my dad recollects, because that makes a lot of sense. In full disclosure, with Martin Maldonado, we do his thumb loop a little bit tighter, or make it so he can pull it tighter. And then also this past spring training, he felt like the wrist closure needs to be tighter as well. And we've heard that from a couple other people. So we're working on some changes there, just real subtle changes that are easy.
Yeah.
But again, like that, again, this is how we operate. It's like we listen to what you guys are experiencing, take that and and just think, okay, yeah, how can we make it better? And then hopefully in a couple months, we're like, hey, Chris, what do you think of this Velcro?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love that. So I have to talk to him about that, and maybe we got to get that back in the pipeline. So very cool.
That's way in the archives.
Exactly. Yeah. So with the all black mitt, like I'd say probably 75% of our contract guys are now in an all black mitt, maybe even higher. And I think that migration is all based on guys throwing faster. Guys are throwing faster, it seems like year over year, even though it's just a couple miles per hour. Again, being the geek, the kinetic energy goes by the square of the velocity, 1/2 mv squared. So even small changes in velocity can make a big change in the energy. So I think that's been one reason why guys are going to the all black, is that they just want something stiffer that lasts longer because the mitts are taking more abuse. And then the thing that's really fascinating to me is the 34-inch mitt, because for years we've had the 35-inch, the 33.5, and the very tiny 32. And the 32 was there. Yes, that's right. You got one, CJ. So in the only guys who've ever used a 32-inch mitt are Benjamin Molina, Hector Sanchez, and then Martin Maldonado. And Maldi, over the last couple of years, he's started kind of migrating north and getting bigger. So he went from the 32 to 33.5. And then he, along with a couple of guys, said, hey, look, can you make a 34? And I remember talking to my dad about this and my brother, and my dad is just like, why are we going to make a 34? We have so many guys who transition from a Rawlings or a Wilson 34, into our 33 and a half. That extra half an inch on the circumference is really not going to make a big difference, And I
Well,
said,
it probably does.
well, yeah. And I said, well, Dad, look, you know this better than anyone else. You got to listen to the players, And it's again, it's the increased velocity, but it's also guys are throwing with more movement. And going to a 35 inch from our 33 and a half is just too big of a jump. It's just so that 34 just gives you that little bit, margin for error. It might be mental, and if it's placebo, if it's mental, hey, that's real, So, but we've had this year so many guys without us going out saying, hey, this is available now. We've had so many guys on contract say, hey, for my mitts for 2020, I want them 34, not 33 and a half. So huge switch. I forget the percentage right now, but I think it is pretty sizable. I think basically whatever we did last year for contract players as a 33 and a half, I think about 50% to 60% went to 34. It was crazy.
Wow.
Just couldn't imagine that, especially since it was all word of mouth. Again, I wasn't out there telling guys like, hey, you want next year. They just kind of would filter in throughout the course of last year. But again, I think it's just a sign of the times, like how the game is changing and what the guys got to do to receive the ball accurately.
Question: do you guys have any of those currently in stock right now? The 34s?
No. we severely, well, just like with the pro players, like I ran out of because we basically put in 2 custom mitt orders for pro players per year, and the big one is in September. And basically, kind of like December, January, I started hearing from a lot of guys that they want to change to a 34. So I had forecasted for some stock 34 inches just to use for our pro guys. Because I have like my own corner of the warehouse where I have stock for chest protectors, leg guards, mitts, all different crazy colors for all the minor leagues. And the idea is we have that buffer stock so that hopefully we never run out of what the teams need, because predicting colors from year to year, month to month is nearly impossible with team colors. You don't want to be caught short, so I kind of keep that reserved for them. Same exact product, except it has less logos because MLB has restrictions on how big your logo. But aside from that, it's the same makeup, same physical structure, what have you. So with those 34-inch mitts that I forecasted, I under-forecasted as well. And towards the end of of shipping things out of spring training, guys who wanted the 34s, I said, sorry guys, like you have to wait, just don't have them. So and because again, like we knew it could be big, but we were just totally surprised by how many people wanted a 34-inch. Wow. So it's crazy. I mean, it's small. It seems like a small difference, but it just had this huge, profound effect.
Very cool. Let's talk about some training gloves. I guess start off with maybe that tiny one that we can, I guess, have our co-host tell the story about where he came up with that idea.
In fact, I'll just interject here, Chris, that I didn't know until it was the 20th and 25th anniversary that you posted that picture on Instagram of really the true origin story of this beautiful guy. So yeah, please educate us.
It was so we're in spring training in Montreal. So we're down in Jupiter, Florida, and we're we had the old infielder saucer foam thing at the end with a couple rubber bands at the back end. And so it was hot, it was humid, guys are tired. It was so they're firing the ball off the jugs machine, and it's literally hitting the hand, bouncing everywhere. And I look at our catching guy, and I forget who it was at the time, but he had the ass a little bit. It was early in the morning. He didn't have his coffee, and I go, honestly, so what is this teaching? I said, we never catch a ball right here. I said, you never catch a ball in the middle of your hand. I said, all we're teaching is to catch it wrong and let it bounce off somewhere. And he's like, well, Snoozy, he goes, you're an artsy guy. He goes, you do some drawing stuff and that. He goes, why don't you just design something for us? And called me out in front of everyone. And I'm like, well, fine, then I will. So I remember we're in the locker room, sitting down, brown bag lunch, and I took a sheet of paper and a pencil and literally traced my hand and drew a glove around it. And when I threw the idea out to your dad, I go, this might be something that would be good for kids. I said, but the drill work that we're doing right now is stupid. It doesn't make any sense to me. It surely doesn't help. And we got to find a way to let kids catch into this imaginary space. I said, so if you can maybe design this, I don't know how many people would like it, but I think that it would help out for younger kids for just getting a feel for receiving. And so, a couple months later, he goes, we're going to send you a couple. So he sent me like 5. And I gave one to Chris Bando at the time. He was with the Indians. And a couple other guys. I'm like, yeah, I just give them away. Here, test these out, play around with them. And I think it was at the end of the year where your dad's like, yeah, he goes, we sent these around to some other people too as like a test, and we got really good feedback on it. And he goes, so we're gonna put this in our line. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And then then we just started using that. And whenever I would have them, people would come up to me like, hey, what is that thing? I remember we were with when was it? I think it was '03 when I was with the Pirates, and Benito Santiago, we're in the outfield, and he comes up and he's like, hey, what you got there? And I go, oh, it's a little catcher's training glove. And like, he had to have it. And I go, well, you're not an all-star guy. And he goes, no. He goes, this is great for the outfield, and I don't have to carry a big glove. And he goes, I'll tell you what, you don't tell anybody, I'll give you like a half a dozen bats, and when you're in the minor leagues, somebody gives you wooden bats, you're like, I'll give you anything you want, just give me some wood. So yeah, that was it. And throughout the years, I've always sent out designs and a couple different ideas. We got into talking the one time about with the girls that I teach for softball, and I just don't understand. They're basically like glorified first baseman gloves. And I would always say that extra, like a first baseman mitt outside here, what does it really serve for the purpose of a catcher on a softball glove? If you're thinking about building a glove, I would always want to start with the pocket. I want to start with that area between my thumb and my forefinger and just kind of build around there, kind of customize to the hand and what's going to work best. So yeah, it's always a fun toy. And when, people see it for the first time, they're like, man, where do I get one of these? And I'm like, go to the website. I said, you can pick them up anywhere now, but yeah, it's cool. There are a lot of, obviously with, people that I've come in contact with, people that actually have coached with me, who run other glove companies. We won't mention any names, but they've done spin-offs on these, and and you couldn't. And the first thing that your dad said was, look, you can't really trademark a glove, because the only thing someone has to do is change the space of an eye hole or an eyelid, and it's a completely different glove. He goes, so, people are going to obviously make copies and try to put their spin on it. And he goes, but, we're the first ones. So that'll always be that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, like unfortunately, we're always copied. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's, helmets, face masks, mitts.
Yep.
I mean, some of them are pretty egregious in terms of what lengths I go to mimic what we're doing. But I guess it's, what's the saying, like, like imitation is the most sincere form of flattery or whatever. But
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, it still sucks though, to be perfectly honest.
Often imitated, never duplicated, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it kind of validates it, and actually, going back to the hockey style helmet, we back when we first came out with it, we had several patents on it, and we could have enforced them, but maybe in some ways that would have actually prevented it from going to where it is now, but who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But it's, but yeah, I mean, like it's, that said, though, we have enforced some patents, and it has been an advantage. But you're right, Chris. Is like there's ways to work around the patent if it's not. It's this balance. Like if the patent is too specific, it's easy to get around it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's too general, then typically the patent examiner will say, well, no, you can't get a patent on this. It's too general. So it's all interesting. But yeah, but we that's exactly as we saw that mindset that like we just want to be first. like, and just innovating. If people want to keep copying us, whatever. I mean, typically, especially in this day and age of social media, I think a lot of people are hip to that now and can kind of tell, like, oh, actually, wait, that's not the original. That's sort of a knockoff.
Mhm.
And there's, so that helps. But yeah,
How does the 3D printer help now than it did, say, 15, 20 years ago?
it's amazing. I mean, so just outside here is our design space that we call the bunker. And I'd show it to you, except that all the lights are off and it's a mess. It's always a mess. And we're always cutting things up and prototyping. We have two 3D printers, and we use them not weekly, but monthly, several times a month. And it's amazing because, like, ever since I started working here back in 2005, going back to that helmet we're talking about, like trying to evolve from where Yadi's helmet was to where we are now, we've always done 3D printing from that point forward. At that point in time, we used Quick Parts. They're an outfit down in Georgia. Basically, I would upload the CAD files, and then about 3 to 4 days later, we'd have the actual printed plastic part. And it's amazing because then based on our decades of helmet design, we typically know plus or minus what we need to put inside the helmet for adequate padding. We start there. So we take the 3D print, put the padding in it, start putting on people's heads, see how it fits. I mean, pretty basic, right? And you start finding, oh, hey, it's a little bit tight here, maybe a little bit too loose front to back. So we adjust the CAD, and then we again, back 2005, we would wait another week or so, get another plastic part, try it. Hey, it's perfect. It's dialed in. And that's important because, when you commit to a mold, it's like 80, 90 grand for a P20 steel injection mold for the shell. And once you make it, you can't make any major changes. You can maybe add some thickness, do a few cosmetic things, buff some lines out, but the fundamental geometry is set. And if it ends up coming too tight, you're living with that for the next 3, 4, 5 years, however long that product's going to live for. So 3D printing is extremely important so that we can sleep at night. Just knowing that once we've kind of finalized design, it really is, we get that first shot. The other reason it's amazing, I mean, we 3D print things that we never even thought we'd 3D print. We're 3D printing foam components. We have like a flexible elastomer that we can print to represent foam padding, so we can kind of check the fit of different shapes, which is really nice. The Axis leg guard. So our leg guard that came out a couple years ago with the hinge. That was something I started, Mickey Mousing around with probably like 9-ish years ago. I was looking at motocross leg guards. Guys who were out dirt biking, had shin and thigh pads that had these hinges. I was like, that's kind of cool, because back in 2005 when I started, one of the first things my dad said is like, hey, the triple knee leg guard design that we kind of pioneered, it's great for protection, what have you, but every time you stand up, you're pulling up the like it kind of keeps diving into your kneecap and it's uncomfortable. We got to fix that. And we tried for years and nothing ever really worked. I started playing around with hinges. It was kind of bulky, and a lot of the dirt bike, motocross, leg guards didn't really protect the knee very well. And if they did, they were built in such a way that they would very quickly get full of dirt. As soon as you drop to your knees doing blocking drills or sliding, they would just get all buggered up. So we kind of sat on it for a while. And then the biggest thing was having the 3D printer. And then we also had a new designer, Austin Roderick, join us. And Austin's dad is Gary, who I mentioned at the beginning. He was the pro rep, who I'm sure, Chris, you met many times over the years. So Austin's amazing. Carnegie Mellon guy, super smart. His ability to do CAD work is through the roof. And so basically with Austin's, CAD designs and then the 3D printer in-house, because at that point we had our own in-house 3D printer. We could just every day be printing new designs, trying to get the right fit, the right pivot point, and then we nailed it. And so it's, 3D printing's huge. And like I said, just having one here, you just print it for all kinds of things. Even, let's see. Yeah, even in the test lab, like this little doohickey right here, this is, batting helmets and catcher's helmets on the head form. In terms of doing quality control testing, there's a lot of variation in the testing, like I mentioned. Just putting the helmet on, day in and day out,
Mhm.
can affect the results. So back to the testing I did, it could have been just like how I put the helmet on. So this is the helmet positioning index, the HPI, and you basically put it on the head form's nose. There's like a little groove in the nose, and then the brim of a batting helmet goes right here. And so we have just great repeatability with this. But this is just something that we 3D print in house. Again, we just all kinds of things you start doing with it once you have it here. So it's super cool.
Very cool. All right. How about some of the other training gloves? One of the ones that I love using the most is the donut.
I don't have that one here and that's that in just the last 6 months, they have like gone off the shelf. And we're seeing guys like you, Tyler, and others like posting videos of using it. And so tell me more about the donut and like how you use it. I mean, we tell guys it's great for transfer and just trying to fast hands.
Absolutely. So with regards to receiving, just because it's at an all-time high and how we're able to quantify it and everything, it's just I think more or less the way I use it is just to understand the first move of the receiver, right? What are they doing? Are they pushing through the ball? Are they above the ball? And I think with regards to how it's just designed, it's designed to give positive feedback right away. Like, okay, is your pocket in the right position to receive the ball? And so, no, the guys love it. They first, when they're not doing it correctly, they hate it. And it said, this is a challenge. I mean, you're all basing this off of, if you're failing at this, then obviously we're getting to the right track. We're on the right track because you're going to get to be more successful with it. So I love it. We use it for transfers as well. We use it with our throwing, but a lot of receiving, just absorbing the pitch and being in the right position, using the leverage of the hand and stuff. So it's really nice.
I like it.
I was going to say, I need a new one though, Stan, because mine's a little soft right now because we use it so much.
Stan, the thing that I like the most about the donut is when I talk about, about having soft hands. You see a lot of guys that will be relaxed before the ball comes and then they open and grab. And I said, well, if I'm throwing an egg at you, that's not really soft. You're actually doing the opposite of what you think is soft. So I like it for the fact that your hand is completely wide inside the glove and you can't close it. You have to keep it like this. And on impact, you'll relax a little bit. So it's this motion versus the actual grab. And once they get a feel for that, they're like, oh, that's what you mean by, having tension before the ball hits you versus, the quarter turn or the relax. If you relax your hand's automatically closed. As soon as you open it up, now you get a bigger space. So that's my main point when I have the kids using that.
Yeah, the fact that it's just instantaneous feedback. I mean, there's no way to say, okay, you're not catching it properly, regardless. If you're not getting it in the pocket and you're doing anything different other than that, you're not catching it flat out. You're done. Fix it.
Right.
I mean, and that's in today's day and age with these kids, which everything is a questionable why compared to where kind of when we all grew up, it was here's how you're going to do it here and you're done. Well, now all these kids have to understand the why to everything they're doing, which I'm cool that I get it. I'm glad they ask questions, but now it gives them well, why am I doing that? Why am I not catching it? Well, here's why you're not catching it. It's automatic feedback to them.
And I think the one last thing that I'll add about the glove is that you can catch higher velocity with it. You don't have that fear,
Right.
just because of the padding and whatnot in it.
Chris, I saw you hold up the anvil.
The anvil. Yeah, it's getting there. We're getting it.
Which I think, Tyler, I think in a previous episode, Tyler, you call it the anchor, which I like that too. Like
Did I call it the anchor?
I think so. Yeah, because it kind of it's like, oh, hey, maybe we miscalled it. Like we should have made it.
I like it. I like it. When my CJ will use that, he's like, "Oh my God, this thing's so heavy." I go, "Well, it's going to build up your forearms, buddy." I said, "And now put your regular glove on." He's like, "Oh, it doesn't even feel like I'm wearing it." I'm like, "So that's the purpose of it."
I've introduced the anvil into my walk-ups with my more elevated guys to really work on the reaction times to get them a little bit quicker, so to speak. So they've hated it, and some have loved it, but then they learn to like it.
Totally.
Well, first off, where did the donut idea come from? And then I guess again, where did people come up with the idea of putting weights, or you can tell about what going into the anvil?
The donut, I can't remember, Tyler. Again, this is something that came through, again, a player that was working with my dad. And basically the call for was an old school 1950s no break mitt for all the reasons you guys said. I mean, like if you can't close your hand around it, it forces you to catch in the right way. And so that was interesting. I'm actually just popped in my head, like thinking about Tony Pena coming through Fenway. I showed him an early prototype of it, and he thought it was pretty cool. But he's like, "Oh no, it's too thick. You got to bring the padding down a little bit." And I remember he took a pen and drew it for me, like where it was. And so, but yeah, it was just, again, another player driven feedback. I mean, we never pretend that we know everything about the sport. We just listen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing we do. The anvil was another Tim Cousins brainchild. So Tim, formed with the Cubs. Now
Timmy was with me when we drew up the other one, because he was with
cool.
the Expos at the time.
Oh, I didn't know. Wow. See, I don't know Tim's history that far.
Great guy.
Tim's amazing. I mean, to see him in his element, working with the players, it's incredible. Like and also terrifying too. I think to be one of his players.
Well, terrifying was the equalizer. We'd use that, and I'd be like, I'm like terrified to use that thing.
Yeah, so, we go to trade shows and we tell people, yeah, these are on discount because they're just made the wrong way. They're not.
Nice.
But yeah, like the whole idea behind the equalizer, very similar to your point with the pocket, Chris, is like just trying to catch in the same spot over and over again. If you got this big web out here and you keep snaring it out there, you get sloppy, and so this, without any big web, you have no choice but to get your hand to the right spot. Definitely wear a face mask.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
So this was, Tim Cousins' idea. Worked with my dad on this one. And then Tim had the idea for the anvil. And this is something we started knocking around, he and I, probably a couple of years before we actually made some real progress towards it. And kind of been thinking about it is like, part of the hesitation is like, who's going to pay money to have some weights put into a mitt? Everyone's already paying a lot of money for their gamer. They might have a backup. They already have, snoozes, CM100 TM pocket mitt, they might have the equalizer. But we started thinking about like wrist weights, and part of our concern about doing like just a heavy wrist weight was that, especially guys, if they're catching at velocity, if you've got mass here on your wrist, that's going to resist motion, and maybe you end up torquing some ligaments or tendons, more if you're doing, again, like high velocity with weight on the wrist. So we also thought about like, well, where do you want to put weight for what we're trying to achieve? Because what we're initially trying to achieve is really good arm strength starting from the shoulder out. And this is something that, Tim mentioned, another guy, Chris Briones, listened to a lot. He said, a mark of a good catcher, a lot of good shoulder strength. Other scouts that we talked to, same thing. They're like, oh yeah, we look for shoulder strength, in a good catcher for good receiving. So we wanted to put the weight as far out from the shoulder as possible. So again, wrist wouldn't be so bad, but if we can get out to the tips of the mitt, that's ideal. Just get more leverage on your shoulder.
Yeah.
But then the thing that I really liked about it from the beginning is what I really wanted to work on was like all the finer muscle movement. When you're working up through the ball, that's not your shoulder so much as like smaller muscles, in your forearms and even out down through your palm and whatnot. So, and the analogy for me is like I used to do a lot of bike racing. So in the wintertime in New England, you really can't go out and ride when it's below zero. So you spend hours, riding in your basement, and you got kind of two things. You got the trainer, which is basically a flywheel that you hook up to your bike, gives you a lot of resistance. You can push really hard on it, but your bike is just stationary. Then you have the rollers, and these are funny contraptions, but you got two like rolling, like rolling pins that you put your back wheel on, and you have one rolling pin that your front wheel's on. And it's your own balance that keeps you up. Like you can kind of go side to side on it. And even though you can't push as hard on it, I feel more exhausted after riding the rollers because you're using all of your smaller stability muscles to kind of keep your balance. And so when Tim started talking about this, that's what I was thinking. It's like you want to train those smaller muscles. And again, if you put the weight on the wrist, you're not getting that. Whereas if you have weight, along your pinky and your thumb, that rotation motion, you're going to be working a lot more of those smaller, muscles, your forearm. So that's, one thing that I was really looking forward to. And it was kind of validated because as we started getting some prototypes out to guys like Tim Cousins, Chris Briones, they started saying, hey, guys that, in the minors who are a bit noisy back there, this really settles them down. And I'm like, aha, like that's it, because that muscle burn,
That makes sense.
you just got to slow it down, so you don't get that all those little muscles, activated. So that was really cool to hear that. So we knew we had the strength because it is pretty heavy. We knew we were kind of getting the guys to calm down. The coolest thing that I heard was transfer. I never imagined this would help with transfer, but as guys started throwing with it, I'm probably going to describe this the wrong way, but some catchers kind of fly wide. Their mitt hand kind of opens up, and then their throw, comes off target. But
This keeps you more compact.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Yes, and I think it's just
Keeps you more in line with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so guys, I think, are more aware of the mitt now because it's heavier, so they'll kind of keep it up against their body versus doing this. So
Nice.
so yeah, so it's that was a really cool byproduct, if you will, to kind of hear that feedback. So yeah, so right now the Anvil is my favorite just because it's so unique. Copied it yet, and
Oh, yeah.
Right. About the keyhole. Now, I don't own one of the keyholes. I can't find it anywhere. I know that they were selling them down at, or you guys were selling them down at ABCA, but
Yeah, I ran into Brad and got a couple.
yeah. So, and Chris, I think you've got one too as well.
I do.
How come I'm always the last one out right here?
So the keyhole is the idea of Eddie Rodriguez, former Yankees catcher, now with the Marlins. I think he's got the head catching coordinator job on the big league side. So Eddie, I mean, it's a similar conversation as to the other mitts. Is like, how do we train guys to receive in the same spot? And Eddie's kind of, I think, tagline, I think, with it is being pocket aware. And so this mitt is kind of the inverse of the equalizer. The equalizer, we took stuff away so you catch, in the right spot. Whereas the keyhole is different in that it's got a netted hole where you're supposed to receive. The one thing that my brother Brad and I have a little trouble with is that we need to get the hole lower. Because if you are trying to receive the ball, a lot of times it's kind of down here, but the hole is kind of up here. So we have a little bit of a challenge. I'm curious what CJ and Chris have to say about it, because I'm worried that we might be training guys to catch up a little bit high. If we move the pocket down, or this netted hole lower, then you start hitting your finger. And the thing we run into is like, well,
I think it needs to be a little bit spaced open a little bit more, because it's not, I mean, it's a fairly tight U or spot to it. So
that's the thing. So you have the U right there, right? Now, I think the one that I sent off to you guys is it's a little different version of that. I mean, it's still with the netting and everything, but when you have the U this way, your hand is almost up in here with the glove. So once this spreads out, now you have like the U is like this, but if it's wider, now you're in more of an L shape.
Right.
That's where, I mean, that's the modification that I made.
It's like when your hand's in your glove here, you're going to get more of an L to that feel to where your pocket hits. I think that's where the part of the keyhole is that part of it. It's the radius of it is too small, because sometimes if a ball, I mean, a minute portion of it, that's almost like it fits too tight in that little keyhole section. It needs to be just a tad wider and maybe a little bit lower, but not offset towards the index finger so much.
But could also that be not just that, but it could also be the thumb. Is think of where your hand is in a glove. If my hand is like this inside here, I've got all this extra space up here. So maybe that's just a matter of the thumb, cutting it down a little bit. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of different ideas, but just being able to use the different devices to achieve the same things. Like kids I'll tell the kids when they use the keyhole, and I don't throw high velocity, but I'll still throw it to them. And I said, the hardest thing that you have to do is I don't want you to try to actually grab and catch the ball. I want you to let it hit it, and then let the force close your hand for you. And as soon as they try to grab one, they'll get one on the tip or it'll bounce out, and they get frustrated. But when they do one without even trying and just let it come in and go into
Yep.
the net, then it's like, oh, that's what you mean by it.
And I think that's been one of the
Same thing with the donut. Yeah.
and I think that's been one of the biggest advantages to that keyhole as well, going from that and the donut is when you tell a kid, don't close the glove, I want you to just actually let it hit in the pocket so you feel it. You get kids that even with their regular glove, they'll want to go snatch at it. So
Yep.
just let it sit and hit in the pocket and just feel it. And I think that's been a big advantage of the keyhole, using it that way as well.
Cool. Good stuff, guys. Yeah. I mean, again, this is how we learn. It's just like putting in your hands, and just, keep making changes and not really being content until we feel like we got it right.
I will say an undisclosed company came by here one day and saw it, and they sent me one to mimic the pocket. And I was like, yeah, it works. It's just not the same though.
It happens, like it's, we try not to take it personal. Although that is really hard sometimes, but we just try to, as our slogan, goes, move forward, above. We just
Exactly.
Try to above it, just keep on going. And hopefully we're already on to the next thing, that they'll be copying in a couple of years.
So is there something that's lying around that is on the forefront, maybe coming forward down the road, either in chest protectors, leg guards?
Maybe. That's why we're in here and not out there in the bunker, because there are like just prototypes all over the place that we're working on. And we're always tinkering on something, like we're always trying to improve, trying to revamp different things. Do you want to meet Francis for a moment here? So it's heavy. So this is Francis, who is our Noxie test surrogate here.
Okay.
I'm not even sure where I should start, because this is another thing we could probably hold a podcast on Commotio cordis. So Francis is supposed to be an average 14-year-old boy, because Commotio cordis really is a condition that occurs around the age of 14, plus or minus a few years. Typically, once you go above age 18, you don't see it anymore. It's true that in baseball, it happens more than any other team sport. Lacrosse, I think, is a close second. And you guys are probably aware of this already, but basically Commotio cordis, or commotio cordis, it's pronounced two different ways, it is basically a disruption of your heart's rhythm. And it occurs if you get hit at just the wrong time during the T wave of your heart cycle. So your heart has a certain rhythm, and a certain portion of it, if you're unlucky enough to get hit during that time, that like microsecond, and you have to get hit within the right range of ball speeds. So if the ball speed's too low, it doesn't happen. But also the ball's too high, in theory, it doesn't happen either. So there's sort of the sweet spot. And they think that's partly why you see it around age 14, because it's typically around ball speeds of like 50 to 70 miles per hour where this occurs, just based on observations. There's a database that's been collecting injury data for about 40 years. So that's kind of where they've kind of bounded it. Down the road is Tufts University, and Dr. Link used to be there. He's now, I think, at a university in Texas. But basically, at Tufts University, he studied this with pigs. So he had juvenile swine pigs that apparently have a rib cage and heart size and heart proximity to the rib cage similar to a 14-year-old boy. And in his lab, he would basically shoot these pigs with lacrosse balls and basically cause the pigs to have heart attacks. He put the paddles, on the pig, and shock the pig's heart back into rhythm, and then do it all over again. And so that's where he learned a lot about what causes this. So then comes along a guy Nate Dow, and Dr. Dow, he was doing his PhD thesis, I believe. He built this mechanical surrogate to sort of represent the pig models, so that we have a more reproducible way to do testing. The thing I'll pause here and say, and I don't want this coming off negative, but as an engineer looking at data, it's true that baseball has this happen more than any other sport. But when you start dialing down into position, you see that there's been well over 300 cases in baseball, but only about 3 in 40 years of tracking this injury. Only 3 were with catchers. So in some ways, we're saying, well, hey, like, shouldn't this standard also apply to like heart guards and compression base layer shirts that advertise, that they help with injury prevention of the heart? And so far, the standard's only been directed at catchers chest protectors, and goalie and lacrosse goalie protectors and defensive. So anyway, so that's a little bit of backstory. But regardless, like, hey, there's a standard, we need to meet it. So to answer your question, CJ, the surrogate is pretty sensitive. We're not trying to game the system, so to speak, but we certainly were trying to make this as small as possible. But the smaller you get, the more force you get transferred into basically this cardiac load cell right here. So that's why that our plate is as big in the vertical direction as it is. Pretty, in terms of the companies who've kind of caught up to us, because we're the first to market and first certified to meet the standard a couple of years ago. I think we're still doing a pretty good job in terms of keeping it as small as possible, and also not as puffy as other brands are coming out. So, but yeah, that's sort of kind of it. I mean, that's the other thing we're doing down here. Instead of just always testing helmets, we're now testing chest protectors for quality control as well.
Right. So what was the cause that brought this to the forefront this last year? That like, did something happen somewhere that just?
Well, yeah, and that's out of our hands. I mean, it's really the way. Let me put Francis back on the show. So the way that this typically works is that NOXI is charged with setting safety standards, and it's typically an organization like Little League or the National Federation of High School or perhaps NCAA approaches NOXI and their board and say, hey, we have a need for X, and it could be a baseball standard, it could be a helmet standard. There are all kinds of NOXI standards, and so NOXI then looks at the injury and tries to find a good way to study it and prevent it, and a good test that would ensure that you minimize the risk for that injury. So just because NOXI makes a standard doesn't mean that you have to adopt it, because basically the NOXI standard can live in existence, but it doesn't really mean anything until an organization adopts it. So what happened this past year, and actually it really started, I think, 3 years ago now, the National Federation of High School said, hey, starting January 1st, 2020, all high school kids have to use a chest protector that meets the NOXI standard. And so, unfortunately, I don't think there's enough PR around this to really get the word out, because we've been selling these for over 2 years now, and starting in about January of this past year, we just were running out. We're still air freighting shipments in right now to keep up with the demand, and it's almost like January hit, and suddenly everyone's like, "Oh crap! Like we need these. What's this?"
Yeah, exactly.
And we had a lot of upset customers that basically were like, "Hey, I just bought a new chest protector from you guys like back in like October, and now I can't use it." And it's like, well, hey, we're really sorry, but we did our best on our website to try to educate you guys, like that, what was certified to meet the standard and what was not. It was a mess from that point. But again, that's not really our responsibility. So far, only NFHS has adopted the standard. Like Little League has not yet. Babe Ruth has not yet.
Right.
Ball probably won't. Just they tend not to have many rules regarding equipment. So there's still opportunity to use it if you're playing travel ball, I believe.
Which is interesting that you just said that too, is that it happens around the ages of 14 plus or minus and at a certain velocity. But high school is going to be more tended towards your upper older kids. It's going to be hopefully, I would hope above 70-mile-an-hour pitches if we're in high school sports.
I'll just say that I think there's some politics and business around it, and leave it at that. But you're exactly right. I mean, if you look at the injury data, there is this target window around age 14. So it was interesting that NFHS jumped on this. And then what was also very interesting is that around September or October, the NCAA suddenly announced, like their scientific advisory board suddenly said, hey, effective January 2020, all college catchers must use, certified NOXI chest protectors.
Wow.
Yep.
Us, on the one hand, is like, well, wait, this typically outside the injury window. is it really necessary? I mean, and certainly, like, meeting a standard perhaps is better if you're trying to minimize an injury, but on the other hand, you really kind of have to ask, is it really needed? Similarly, I had major league and minor league guys saying, "Hey, do I need this now?" And I said, well honestly, not really. Typically, once you're age 18, like your bones, or the theory, this is not proven, but the theory is that the bones are much more dense and stronger in your rib cage. You have more musculature as well, and those things basically help minimize the amount of force and trauma to your heart for similar pitch speed or foul tip speed. So it's interesting. But the NCAA very quickly retracted it, which it was a big mess. Odd, very, very odd. But again, we don't make the rules. We just make the product that meets the rules, and we go from there.
Absolutely. Well, right on.
Cool.
Well, I think, Chris, we're going to shift over to announce those winners. Our giveaway.
The All-Star giveaway. So let me hit I'm going to hit the random number picker here. And I got the list of everybody that followed the guidelines on both Twitter and Instagram. So I'm going to hit that here. You guys can see this on your screens right here. So Stan, let's do the first one. Let's see this one. Let me hit that. So the first one will be our Instagram winner. So why don't you announce that one if you can?
So this is the lucky winner who has the handle of Matt_Gurnow14. Once again, Matt.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so Matt_Gurnow14.
All right, cool. And then let's do the Twitter one. Let's pop that one up. And there's your winner. Who we got?
Yeah, so for Twitter, it looks like a Bryce Abel 13. BRYCEABELL 13.
Fantastic. So those two guys, I'll post the video along with their handles and their pictures. So those are our two winners. And then Stan, I guess we can get we'll have them DM you the addresses, and then they can enjoy their CM 100 TMs. Get a lot of work out of it.
And the last thing is that All-Star is sending me a donut, an anvil, and a focus framer, and a pocket, and a magnesium mask.
And a 34-inch mitt, right?
That's right.
Although, since I've been the hockey style guy, I might have to eventually try one of these traditional masks. So
I'm a big fan of the FM 4000. It's
I might have to I don't know, make some more posts and see if I can get one sent up. And of course the blue for the Mound Visit colors, of course.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been fantastic, Stan. We can't thank you enough. Great background in history, and just a tremendous company that you guys are running there, and just the innovativeness that you guys have put forth, not just in the position, but just in all of baseball. And again, we're moving right along with you and rising above everything. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, guys. It was so much fun to talk shop, and hopefully we can talk about some more stuff down the road as well. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Sam. Thank you so much, and we hope your family and y'all are staying safe and healthy in all this time of everything, man.
Absolutely, man. Thanks,
guys. Thank you again. Thank you. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Are you all intrigued yet? A huge thank you to Stan and his team over at All Star Sports. Go give them a follow on Instagram at All Star Sporting Goods, or Twitter at All Star Sports, or you can even go visit their website at all-starsports.com. We want to say thank you again for tuning in. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler Goodrow, and on behalf of Chris and CJ, we want to say thank you, be well, and you're going to catch us real soon.